Hello and welcome to ET's second webinar on the Back to Business theme. The first one was 2 weeks back, and we spoke about the strategies for unlocking India. India is still not unlocked. ET has reported more than enough stories about the problems of unlocking. The question that is gathering force, which everyone is thinking here at ET, all of you who have kindly joined to listen to us, India Inc., policymakers, millions and millions of Indians, is how do we get, which was once the fastest growing large economy in the world, and until recently could boast being the 5th largest economy, how do we get that back on track? All of us who have lived through in our adult lives after the 1991 economic reforms, we never thought, given all the problems we have, we will face a situation like this. We are actually talking about Indian economy contracting. We are talking about job losses in numbers that would have seemed laughable just 2 months back. We are talking about companies going down in numbers that would have been a nightmare scenario. We are already looking at middle class job cuts, pay cuts, wage laborers not knowing when their next job is going to come. What we read right now is a massive, and ET has been calling this out for nearly 3 weeks. We need a massive, imaginative, intelligent stimulus. How that stimulus should be, how it should be framed, what are the specifics of that is what we'll discuss today. With me are two of my colleagues, Pranab Samanta, Deputy Executive Editor, Economic Times, and the ET editor who tells us what the government thinks, how the government thinks, and what are its priorities and difficulties. Also with me is Pandey, editor, Economic Times, and as I said at the last webinar, ET is bookman for all things economics. I'll start. Of course, we will take questions. We already have about 50 odd questions from people who have registered. Thank you very much. I want to tell all the viewers that I'll try to take all your questions. But given the shortness of time and trying to be democratic about this, I may not be able to address each question individually, but I will definitely try to cover all the themes and very important themes that our viewers have already sent us. Pranab, let's start this. I want to ask you, everybody is talking about that the government needs to give a huge, big second stimulus package, but few people actually know what are the government's priorities right now? What does it think are its policy constraints and policy options? And what are its main strategies or thinking behind unlocking India?
Thank you, Saubhik. Thank you to everyone who's seeing this. I think broadly it's important to understand, like you yourself mentioned, Saubhik, it's kind of a unprecedented situation. So the evolutionary curve is also not quite known. And I think at this point in time, the government is begun to realize that if doing a lockdown was a bold decision, exiting it is an equally complicated and also will require political boldness on their part, because how do you exit? And then there is the risk of, the pandemic, how it shapes up. No one knows that. Everybody knows that the virus is not going to go away tomorrow. Sure. So at this point in time, you have only your essential services working, and about 60% here back of the envelope of the economy is shut.
Right.
So when you talk about a stimulus, what stimulus to a shut economy, right? It has to start coming back to life. I mean, even if it's a small shop, it has to open. Right. So I think that's what is really where the debate at the moment is. How do you exit the situation you are in, come to the point from where a stimulus of whichever kind actually makes an impact? At this point in time, there is no production happening in about 60 to 70% of the economy. And if you, just one order is not moving things around, right? People are scared that if I open up and somebody is tested positive in my facility, the facility may be sealed for 2 days. What's the economy? So there are so many uncertainties and around the whole question of exiting. So I think we need to understand the sequence over here better. The sequencing will, as it is dawning upon many government practitioners at this point in time, is going to be exiting and then timing the stimulus at the right time so that it makes the desirable impact. And at that point in time to figure out what sort of a stimulus should it be, a big bang or sectoral. So I think that this whole issue of stimulus has to be broken down into 3 or 4 steps. I think I'll stop there for now.
Okay. Before I go to Vinay, Pranab, I just want to ask, because that's a very interesting point and not something that either media or experts have actually talked about. If I understand rightly, you are saying that the first step will have to be opening up, and the stimulus has to be timed with the opening up for it to have its maximum desirable impact. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and the uncertainties are about opening up, right? It's not just a stroke of pen. You may issue an order. We've seen so many orders open up shops. It doesn't really work out that way on the ground. So the uncertainties attached to opening up. So, how is it perceived by different states? How does a local administration implement? Remember, we are under, the country is under DM Act at the moment, the Disaster Management Act, which gives humongous powers to the state. So all these uncertainties are anybody doing small business. I mean, the huge uncertainties. And so even if you give him liquidity, how is he going to spend it?
Okay, thanks. That I think, Vinay, taking off from what Pranab said, that the sequencing is very important. The other debate that has been going on, and I think from what we know, that this is a debate inside the government, as and when they do come out with the stimulus, which is preconditioned on us, as Pranab said, getting a smart unlocking strategy done. Should it be one big bang, which I think all of us in media would prefer because it will be a great headline? Or should it be a staggered stimulus because this problem is not likely to go away, let's say, before 18 months, as scientists are saying?
Yeah, thank you, Saubhik, and welcome everybody to webinar. That's the 2 important questions that we need to address now, is how to open the economy and how to roll out the stimulus. Now, obviously, Pranab pointed out, if economy doesn't open, what good is stimulus, So it should be also staggered. But while the stimulus can be staggered, I feel there is a need to announce it right away, and it should be a maximalist thing. Now, I have 4 or 5 reasons for that. One, that if you announce a big stimulus, it's a big, massive sentiment booster, so that the positivity returns to the economy. Right now, we are all in a despair mood. So if, let's say, government says, okay, we are going to spend 15, 16 lakh crores to revive the economy, that immediately boosts the sentiments. Secondly, the important thing is that, it allows businesses to plan their opening better. If I know that this is on the way, this is available to me, then accordingly, I will plan my opening better. At whatever stage it opens, I know these are the tools available to me, then I can use it. Thirdly, the stimulus is a very complicated thing. Nobody knows what is going to work, what is not going to work. So let's say if we were to announce a stimulus right away, then that will allow for an informed debate on the stimulus. That, look, is this right? Is this not wrong? So even while the economy opens gradually, we will have our tools ready by then, that this is what needs to be done, and those can be debated then. Otherwise, we announce something and it doesn't work, So that's 4th point is it will discourage extremes from businesses. If businesses know that, look, there is help available down the line, so all the firing and shutting down, all those things that will happen can be stopped, look, there is help along the way, and it is big help, If something doesn't work, if not needed, obviously that stimulus can be rolled or not be rolled, But if we have a big target amount, and lastly, it provides some sort of a stability to the financial markets, financial markets, which are just basically going and speculating what is going to happen, So that it provides some sort of stability to financial markets and also time to react to things. Otherwise, you have extreme volatility when it is done. So I think a big bang stimulus needs to be announced and properly debated as we open the economy.
Good. Okay, that's two excellent points from my 2 panelists. I'll just summarize it for the viewers. What we have said so far is that the question of stimulus is intricately linked with the question of exiting the lockdown, right? You can't divorce one from the other. And Vinay supplemented Pranab's point by saying that while he agrees that it should be, the two are interlinked, and the stimulus, the injection of the stimulus into the economy can be staggered, but the intent has to be big bang when you announce it. As in, to take an abstract example, if you are wanting to spend rupees 100 on the economies, say that you are going to spend rupees 100, you don't have to spend rupees 100 immediately, but people need to know that rupees 100 will be spent, and that announcement in itself will prevent a lot of economic grief down the line in the next weeks, days, months. We will get back to these questions again, Pranav and Vinay, but I want to take some questions which have already come to us from viewers who have registered. Thank you again for all of you who have registered, and thank you to all of you who are listening in. I will sort of, the first set of questions, I will summarize them under two broad heads. Pranab, there are a lot of questions on what should the government's advisory be on social distancing to businesses, all kinds of businesses. We have here viewers who are from sales, who are from marketing, who run small companies, some executives from large companies. They are all asking social distance. It's a question that every manager, every CEO, even every employee is thinking. Post lockdown, whenever that is, however that is, how does social distancing and the business of business go together?
Saubhik, thank you for the questions, and to the viewers as well. Saubhik, you would agree one thing, one takeaway from the lockdown is that the kind of awareness and self-instilled discipline which people have shown on social distancing and other such things has been quite amazing. So I think businesses do realize the importance of, keeping good health. I mean, that's period. I think the real question is, what if there is a case, despite you actually following these norms, what are the economic consequences that you may face? So the rules of social distancing are pretty much out there. You need to mention all of that. You need to mention all of that in your advisories and all. They're all there. But what the government has to signal over here is that in case there is some kind of a case or anything of the sort, that it won't lead to disastrous consequences like sealing for a long period of time, production being impeded, things like that. I think that kind of assurance, all measures which different sectors or industries can take, like we are looking at the debate around the aviation sector, whether the center seat should be kept vacant or not kept vacant. Does that amount? I think those are scientific decisions which industry can make as long as you ensure that basic medical rules are followed and transmission is kind of deterred. However, what's important is that government sends a signal that it's not going to be punitive and draconian about it.
Right.
It's going to be smart and enabling about it.
So there's a follow-up question here, which also has come from viewers, and this I'd like to ask both Pranab and Vinay, which is taking up from what Pranab said, that there should not be, the government intent should not be punitive. Now, ET had done a story a few days back where the government had clarified that in the case of a COVID-19 positive workplace, right, there will not be any draconian outcome. However, business had wanted government to declare that there will be no. Pranab, is there any chance that such a clear, firm declaration will come in the few days down? Because that will have impact.
See, the realization is there that without this kind of signaling, things are not going to take off. And that brings me back to the whole point of how are you going to exit the lockdown if you're not going to give people the confidence, right? So, that realization is there. But then there is the political thing, and the numbers should not suddenly shoot up and the India story goes completely south as far as COVID is concerned. Somewhere that will require political boldness. The realization is there. I would say to some extent the intent is there, but whether people are willing by coming out of the trees and really batting in that direction, I think we're still some distance away from there, but it's important that that is done.
Right. So it's a sort of glass half full as far as business is concerned on this. Vinay, the question I wanted to ask you on this same subject is that what sectors do you think of, let's say, let's take the middle class white collar economy. Where would social distancing, if any at all, be the most challenging? Many questions have been asked on this by viewers. Where would social distancing be most challenging?
Obviously, see, to an extent, it's possible in manufacturing sectors where you can make distances. Where we are going to run into challenges is services. How do you go to a barber shop? How do you go to a restaurant? How do you go to movies? And the biggest problem we are facing is that our services economy is 60%. And while manufacturing, we will be able to recoup some of it because there's inventory depletion and that restocking will happen.
Sure.
In services, the output that is gone is gone. You just because you're sitting at home, you won't go to the barber twice because you've missed your haircut once. So same. Or if not there, then you're not going to watch it. So, or you're not. All the eating out has been missed. So that part needs to be. That part is the most difficult one. How do you get your major services economy to open? Offices is obviously also going to be a challenge because then you need to shrink capacity if you have to also have social distancing. But I think my still biggest concern would be how do you get services sector to open, your entire retailing, these are big parts of the economy. How do you get people to visit shops, what kind of discipline required in shops? So malls, when do you open malls? So these are big activity generators, where you can have some bit of discretionary spending, and if these don't open, you are left to all essential spending, which is not going to drive economy. So that part of the economy needs to be open, and which is the most challenging bit. How do you get the discretionary part of the economy, a lot of which is services and entertainment, to open? So those are the big challenges.
Good. Pranab, if I can throw this bit from Vinay's remarks at you, since you are tracking how this, that the two data points. One is what Vinay said, that 60% of India's GDP by one metric. If you break the GDP into another, 60%, roughly 60% of India's economy is consumption, right? The intersection of consumption and services, that's huge for India. How does the government think? Is there any thinking in terms of kickstarting this specifically?
I think at this point in time, the thinking over here is that give as much. Okay, there are two baskets I think the government is really working on. One is what are the immediate steps in terms of what we've been talking about, exiting and related stimulus, etc. The other is to use this kind of crisis as an opportunity to do some big ticket reforms. So I think easing up a lot of stuff on the manufacturing side, they're betting big time on manufacturing. Right. And they are hoping to actually drive up consumption by pumping in money in the rural economy.
Right.
They're hoping rural consumption will actually drive a lot of this thing. Right. Now that remains to be seen, as the papers are full of these stories. One of the big problems about opening up is that most of our worst affected COVID areas are actually our centers of, our urban economic centers. So the real bet is on the rural consumption, on the rural economy. There's no direct cash transfers, talk about, increasing the number of days under Manrega and others. So people actually have cash in hand and they go out there and spend it. Frankly, that remains to be seen how much of an impact that can make, how much of manufacturing can take off in the medium term. That remains to be seen. But if not accompanied by big ticket reforms, like every other bit, this can also fall through. So the government has to really think this through.
Is there a timeline, Pranab, in terms of these reforms, or this is not immediately the first priority, obviously, as you said, but let's say 2 months?
I would imagine, but it's I would imagine that would be the time frame. But right. The issue is how you can realize you can only plan your next step or its execution depending on how well you've performed your first step.
Right.
So it is all, and sorry for the cost of repetition, it is contingent upon how well we exit. Right. A lot of these steps are contingent upon that. Right. And just to actually bring back to the previous question about this thing is, how do you work under even if the lockdown lifts? The government is actually talking about how do factories and official, the companies, institutions put surveillance and screening mechanisms. Right. Right. Now, the real question which we are learning now is, what do you screen? Do you screen for symptoms? Do you screen for the disease itself? And when you come down to testing, the testing validity is not known. It's not, you can get it after 2 more days. So these are all issues which for which guidelines should be given, because otherwise you don't know what kind of screening or surveillance mechanism you want to set up in your own facility.
Good. Vinay, let me ask a question that has just come in from Rahul. Hi, Rahul, thanks. It's an interesting question. I haven't heard anybody actually sort of talking about this in a bit. How will the pandemic affect the currencies and purchasing powers of the currency? I think what Rahul means is that what will happen to the rupee down the line?
Right now, the rupee is basically weakening because of dollar is strengthening. It is not that inherently there is something wrong. It's a global thing. That's the go-to currency for everybody in a pandemic, So that is the reason rupee is strengthening. Once the rupee once this lockdown lifts and fundamentals take over, it is very likely that, given that crude is at record lows and it is not going to meaningfully rise, we are going to have rupee strengthening back. So it is not that, we will suddenly have, because of rupee, imported inflation surge or anything. So I don't think rupee, the main concern here is currency at any point of time. This is happening at very low transaction levels. I mean, who is using Forex right now? Your oil imports are down, your total imports are down, your travel is nothing. So it's these transactions are happening at thin volumes, and there is a global thing for the dollar. So once that, and dollar itself now, with so much of printing going on, will dollar maintain its strength also? That also needs to be seen. Yeah. So it's, I don't think currency is at point on the table as one of any concern as of now.
Right. Pranab, there again a bunch of questions on, will the lockdown, exiting the lockdown, become complicated by the center versus state debates, or as one viewer has put it, center versus state conflicts?
One sincerely hopes not. Right. Until now, the idea seems to be, all these video conferences, the idea seems to be that, it's kind of presented Team India kind of a picture. But what's happening with this Team India kind of a picture is everybody's looking at the center to take the decision, center is looking at states to take the decision. We're running in circles, particularly on key decisions on exiting the lockdown. Now, that confidence has to come that the center takes the decision, regardless of what the criticism or otherwise may be from states. And I think a little amount of conflict is healthy. And there will be variations. India is a diverse country, it's a diverse economy. There will be variations, and we see it when we look at the issue of migrant labor, for instance. Bihar has a point of view, Punjab has a point of view. So I would come at it from this point, Saubhik, that too much of consensus is also not great. It is good to have a little bit of healthy conflict, because that's the only way we're going to move forward. If everyone's going to look at each other, you do this first or you do that, we're never going to come out of this. So everybody supported a lockdown, maybe because, that gave a lot of power to the states. Now, states have to risk lifting the lockdown, and someone has to start. And if it has to be the center, let it be the center, maybe state A, state B. There will be a little mutual criticism, and I think that's healthy. There's nothing wrong with that. Right. So, but that's the only way to move. Too much of, showing consensus also makes you just stuck in one place.
But that's a point very well made. But one problem, or is a problem, that we all know production is national, right? The supply chains runs across regions. So are we going to face a situation where state X takes a bolder initiative to open up the economy and state why it doesn't. PMs have been left to decide, and therefore, in effect, let's say one or two industries remain at limited production capacity or no capacity because the intervention.
Look, I don't think any state at this point in time is in a situation to, in an economic situation, to stay away from a growth trajectory, or at least some revival strategy. So if I think one starts, the laggard will not going to pull it down. They will be forced to actually join the whole thing. If you lose out on the supply chain, somebody else might fill it. So a little bit of competitiveness is good in the terms of revival. And I think center will play an important role in letting this competitiveness start, rather than, okay, if one part doesn't work, somebody else might, raise their hand and try to do something about it.
Right.
But if we don't break this or sort of move out of this, it's going to be a huge issue.
Right. So that's a good point. Can center play the referee here, encouraging states to be more competitive about getting the economy back on track? We will see how the Chief Minister respond. Vinay, there is a question, something we discussed in the first webinar, you might remember. After that, ET did a very large graphic, as we see, calculating what should be the size of the stimulus, looking at various studies. There are many questions which have come about what kind of fiscal deficit relaxation should we do and how should we spend that. Do you want to take both questions?
Yeah. So we had kind of calculated a size of 16 to 17 lakh crores, I think, which comes to about roughly about 8 to 9% of GDP. Now the point here is that we should, at this point, we have to forget about fiscal deficit. That is the thing that we need to move away from. What good is fiscal deficit if we are going to land in a spiral of deflation, stagnation, and negative growth? So these are not really happy choices. Do you go with fiscal deficit and high fiscal deficit and its consequences, or you go with a situation of deflation and the subsequent debt spiral that you get into after that, because your real burden of the debt rises because of deflation. Now, in my view, the lesser evil or less bad choice would be to go for a massive fiscal stimulus. So even though, what are the consequences of fiscal stimulus you'll have is maybe higher inflation, right? Or eventually spilling over to higher current account deficit and bit of macroeconomic imbalance that we also, and we know what those imbalances are. But on the flip side, it will encourage growth. Your nominal value of debt to effective debt will come down, so there'll be more propensity for people to consume. So if you look at the balance of the risk, I would rather go with a heavy fiscal deficit rather than going the prudent fiscal way, because that is really going to land us in trouble if we have a situation of deflation where debt becomes too burdensome for people. So right now, and which is what I think our policymakers are somehow caught up in 2013 time warp, where we 2008-9 stimulus did create problem for us because we could not exit from the stimulus in timely way. And that's why policymakers are hesitant. But if you look at the way the world is going, look at the unprecedented printing US has done of money. There is no way we are going to get out of this through prudent economic measures. It has to be a much bold stimulus. We take the stimulus and then we try and manage its consequences if come out. I mean, inflation is hardly a worry right now, When there are people are not buying, what kind of inflation are we talking about? If we are not importing, where is the current account deficit? If crude is low, where is the issue of rupee? So right now we have to be really bold. And as we calculated, you have to go with the massive 8-9% of GDP. Otherwise, this is just not going to work for us.
Yeah. Pranab, let me get back to you with what Vinay said, which is that we need how it is staggered, but the central sum has to be huge. So it is sort of humble contribution to this debate has been around 9% of GDP, which works around 17 lakh crores. This government has been extremely praiseworthy way very, very cautious about the macro balance. It has tried to maintain macro balance all through a slowdown, right? Ignoring advice by many well-known economists to let go of the fiscal deficit in a massive way. Given that approach, do you think the government is now ready to set that rule aside and go for a huge fiscal spend?
I think a short answer to that would be yes. I think you're absolutely right that the government has been sort of quite particular about maintaining that fiscal this thing. But that was a different situation, a different time. The crisis clearly has changed all of that, and it's not just India, right? It's global. What two things they do understand? One is that liquidity is needed in the short term for people to start off from wherever they are. And second, we need to end this year with some kind of growth, which can be respectable. I don't think the two can be achieved without what Vinay is saying. I mean, the fiscal deficit, clearly, that whole thing has to be breached. Question is about how much and more importantly, when. The political question, I think what the leadership is trying to ask the government, its bureaucrats and others is, I'm willing to do it, but when do I do it? And can you assure me some kind of an impact? You take this decision, it should make the necessary impact. Well, those are tough questions for anyone to answer in this uncertain situation, but I am pretty certain that that is not going to really hold back things when and if they consider themselves ready to do it.
I think that for all of us, including our viewers, hopefully that piece of good news should not go unnoticed. As Pranab is saying, and Pranab tracks government very, very closely, that there is no political confusion anymore that India might need a huge fiscal stimulus. When that comes, how that comes, we will see. But that's an excellent piece of news. To go back to Vinay again with a question, Vinay, which is flood of questions are coming. Should the middle class get a tax cut, temporary tax cut? A. B. Should the government, like they're doing in UK and other Western countries, should the government bear part of the losses that employees are facing with salary cuts?
I have never been in favor of tax cuts because
Please explain yourself well, because a lot of people are in favor of this.
I agree, but I'm coming not from personally, when I would like a tax cut, but I'm coming more from a macroeconomic perspective. Will tax cut helps? Now the point is that in a situation where sentiment is low and you cut taxes, that tax cut is saved. It is never spent. So the idea that if you give a tax cut, it's going to be consumed. If the sentiment is low, people have already lost salaries. There's been pay cuts in many segments. Then you give a tax cut. Is the person going to go and spend? No, he's not going to spend. He will most probably save that. So the purpose of stimulating the economy through tax cut is not going to help in that sense. If it's an indirect tax cut, let's say GST, a GST relief there and prices fall, yes, people will probably go out and consume. But income tax cut is in this environment is not going to work. So my sense is that it is better to distribute this money out, even if it is the middle class most stressed. I would put the question in another way. Is it more stressed than, let's say, all those migrant laborers who have lost jobs? Is it more stressed than all the services person who have had no income for 40 days? So is it the no stress segment? I'm not so sure. So it has to be in a case of limited resources. It has to be on where does the money go first. It's a competing. There's a finite amount of money. That can, and even that is most likely coming out of printing soon. It is not there. Available taxes are not there. So how much can you give away to the middle class? Middle class is gaining anyway. The low inflation always helps the middle class. There is low inflation, so you are anyway. You are gaining from that. Secondly, the other part of the question was should you subsidize people who are losing jobs?
Correct.
And
or facing salary cuts. That was the
question. Facing salary cut. Again, I come to the same point. Salary cut is better than jobs lost. Our economy is 10% formal, 90% informal. The informal economy has been ravaged. whereas formal economy still has some semblance of salaries, incomes are coming, but informal economy, there's absolutely, the day lockdown happened, earnings stopped. Now, do you compensate those people first, or do you compensate the formal sector workers who still have some salary flowing in, some ability to consume? Can you subsidize this? How do you reach out the informal sector? That is the biggest problem. We don't have data, we don't have information how to reach out. That is why when we suggested that we give out as help to informal sector, we said go by households. Instead of finding out who has lost his job and give him money, we go by household, which are the deprived households, and we reach out to them, and we had a figure of 6,000 to 9,000 rupees, 6,000 for the rural areas and 9,000 for the, so that you reach consumption. But every question has to be framed in context of finite resources and who is the worst affected. White collar workers, I'm not sure. Middle class, I'm not sure. There's a vast majority out there that is much more than these.
Pranab, on this question of, we had discussed in the last webinar, on a temporary universal basic income scheme. Elaborate for that, let's say for 6 months.
A kind of a universal basic income scheme.
A strictly temporary. So ET had done some back of the envelope calculations, not that that's the last word. We had arrived at 6,000 for rural households and 9,000 for urban households. I'm sorry, I must apologize to many of our viewers who are asking questions on the middle class. I understand where you're coming from. We are all in the same boat here, but we are trying to discuss this with as much detail as possible. And as Vinay has explained, as much as we think we are not the most worst hit section of society right now. So please bear with us as we discuss other things. Yeah, Pranab, sorry.
No, look, I'm no economist. I mean, let me do this, but and there's a lot of debate going on within the government. So there is no one view I can actually tell you. This is a particular view that you give some basic money. What was the Congress plank of whatever Nyay? Give some kind of money in the hands of people, and that's fine, as long as it is part of a larger plan. I kind of would shudder to think that this country can actually revive without the middle class being a part of it. I think they'll have to lead the fight, literally. Because when, I don't know, I mean, there are economists who can correct me, when the middle class does well, everybody does well, generally. And businesses there, and middle class lives are generally linked to businesses. You all work somewhere, and those businesses have to do well. So the machine has to start going. I don't think we can actually hope for a dole economy to revive kind of the entire situation. What the dole strategy can do is it can help give that spark to start consumption, do something. But eventually, when you guys are talking about economic revival, it has to be through this strategy. And I don't think just doles or giving money in the hands of people is going to be enough. I mean, money should be given if you give liquidity, it should grow. Right? If you give it to some business, it will grow. Production ramps up, something happens. So I don't know how that's going to be worked out, but I don't see that a revival, a proper revival, can happen without actually the middle class. I think that was the story of the economic reforms as well. The middle class led, and it grew, and along with that, a lot of other things grew. So I would go with that picture.
Let me take that back to you.
Yeah, I actually wanted to ask there, Pranab, and I agree with you that when we did suggest 6,000, 9,000 rupees transfer, we suggested this is strictly for the lockdown period. We didn't say it's forever, a universal basic scheme. We calculated how much consumption a person needs, because the idea is to alleviate stress so that these people who don't have income and most of the time don't have savings, you don't want to land them in a money lender's debt trap, because that would be devastating if these guys were to fall into poverty. So our idea was that if lockdown is for 40 days, you transfer this much money so that they have consumption and they don't land into debt and poverty spiral. But eventually the revival has to come not from this massive bottom consuming essentials, but of the wider economy working, which is what Pranab is also saying, that, so while we give sustenance to these people who have been worsted, the ultimate step has to be the revival of the economy and business, where people start going out, they start consuming, and services activity starts, and the businesses are provided support so that they also don't land into a debt situation. The biggest worry is that, with incomes gone, activity at a muted level, how do businesses solve their debt? Are we going to have how do we avoid mass bankruptcies, for the SME sector, MSMEs, for corporate India, for everybody, So those are the biggest challenges. And once we have addressed those, eventually the things will recover. But to think that a basic income scheme, we cannot afford a basic income scheme from everybody. It is
no, correct.
No situation we can.
Correct.
It has to be.
But let me ask you, sorry, Vinay, let me ask both of you this question, because this is the weight of questions and sentiments that has been expressed by our viewers, which is understandable, because I think the panelists as well as most of the viewers are, broadly speaking, sort of in the middle class. There might be one or two CEOs and promoters lurking, but they are not asking any questions. So I'm assuming they are mostly middle class. Can India grow with a despondent middle class? Can India grow with a middle class for the first time in 30 years, facing job losses, faces the fear of a permanent job loss? As Vinay said, with spending down, with fixed costs remaining as they are, 6 months down the line, if the middle class feels as despondent as it has started feeling now, can India grow? I take this first, then I'll go to Pranab.
Yeah, it's a difficult call in a sense that we don't know how the lockdown is going to pan out, and every country is facing that challenge. The longer it lasts, the more desperate it is going to become. So at some stage, like Pranab had said, that somebody has to take a bold call. Let's say if there are 300 districts that are green districts, the center has to step in and say that in these districts, the priority is economy and not COVID. If you have a COVID case, you make that a red zone, you lock that limited area, start tracing and testing. But these green zones, you have to flip the argument. In the green zones, the argument has to be economy and not management of COVID. Unless that direction goes out from center to state to the local administration, things are not going to change, because right now it's a very convenient situation where everything is flowing from the top. The states have no incentive. They say, oh, center has closed it and we don't want to take a chance. When you reverse the narrative, look, now economy is more important than management of COVID. We have got a handle on the disease. We have created capacity. We can address it. Cases may rise, but we have the resources to ensure that it doesn't become a pandemic. So now the argument has to be flipped. And sooner we get it, sentiment can change very quickly. I'm telling you that.
No, correct. So let me take this to Pranab. That what is Pranab? I mean, and this I think is one of the key parts that we started the discussion with also. What role should or can the center play in telling states and DMs that unless you are in some kind of a terrible hotspot, that change your priorities, and we will ride with some surge in infection, which I think will be a politically tough call to take. But at what point and how will this be done?
No, Saubhik, I mean, the answer is in your question. I mean, frankly, I'll answer this politically, right? I mean, look, what I am worried as a political journalist is when politicians do their own gaming, they somehow feel that I must keep the poor happy so that my votes, my basic constituency goes on. And as long as the poor are okay, I can continue. The middle class takes a hit. It's fine. Okay. But this is where the voting and the taxpayer thing, without the taxes and without the taxpayers' health, how are you going to move on? here is actually the real political leadership question. It's not about what you tell the DMs. The DMs, with all due respect, are bureaucrats. They will execute what you tell them to. The question is, you, as Vinay rightly put it, and I completely agree, is if the first part of the lockdown was about fighting the pandemic, now it has to be about exiting and reviving the economy. That's the yardstick. Unless it's a red spot is not the issue. You have to do business even if it's a red spot district. You have to do business in Bombay. You have to do business in Delhi. You can't just say it's shut down, right? You have to find innovative ways and smarter ways of doing business in these places.
But Pranab, how do we get Uddhav Thackeray and KCR?
I agree. I mean, and that's the political question. And I think they all have to look at where their economies at this point in time are. I mean, how long do we wait for it to become a disastrous situation? I mean, already the Finance Commission, these states have gone to Finance Commission saying that, oh, please revisit your formula once again. So again, you want money from the revenue pools. The revenue side is not looking up, and Vinay will bear me out on that. So you want the money to give the doles, but where will the money come from? And this question is staring at your face faster than people realize. That's why I feel something has to give. And if it has the center who has to take that decision, that we will do business, even if it means doing business in containment zones, we have to show the political courage to be able to, and the innovativeness to be able to do that. I think that's the challenge. Now, shutting down your home and sitting inside is not going to work. That worked to the extent that you created the infrastructure, that tomorrow you have a surge, and mind you, there may be a surge if there is the health infrastructure to deal with that surge, right? But now you get to business and start doing that work, and if there are patients and if there is this thing, will you deal with it? Because, after all, the stats show us that 80-85% people do recover, and we must find ways of have confidence in our healthcare system to be able to deal with this.
Would it make a difference, or is this a viable political strategy that, let's say, because politics hasn't stopped even in pandemic, that BJP ruled states, which are not as many as they used to be, but there are some major states, they take the lead? That's something that is plausible.
Why not? I mean, but what the leadership has to come from this, Saubhik, is that this competitive politics over the poor, right? That has to stop, and I think there the center has to play a big role. It has to show the way. I don't think states will automatically take that. They will look for cue from the center, and whether it is in form of stimulus, reforms, whichever way, or administrative decisions, or say that I start lifting the DM Act from certain places. The political risk, I think, will have to come from the center when it comes to economic revival. Once that signaling is there, I'm sure then states will compete with one another to come out of it. That's my take, and I will defer to.
Saubhik, I would just like to add
there are again a bunch of questions on something that we have been discussing.
2 points. Can I just add to 2 points?
Yeah, sure.
So basically, there is a thought consensus, and there is also a popular consensus that things have gone too far. And if you look at globally also, the countries that are opening up, it is not that the cases have stopped. Cases, I mean, Italy, Spain, cases are rising even now in thousands, but the countries have decided to open that, look, we have reached the peak, we are declining, but we cannot hold off anymore. And even the popular consensus would be on that lines that, look, at some stage you have to start opening, and we've already done 40 days. Can we do more? No, it's going to be very difficult. So the popular sentiment is also behind this move that let's start opening up. You cannot have this lockdown continuing any longer. So, and we need to tap into that sentiment and take the risk that you have to take the risk.
But let me ask a question, and I think if both of you can briefly answer this, which is related to what we are discussing, that for the, yes, is turning, and as Pranab said, that there needs to be clarity in how the politicians think through this. But given that it was Prime Minister's personal authority and popularity, which made a usually undisciplined, chaotic country going to what will be a 40-day lockdown. I mean, without Narendra Modi's massive personal authority and popularity, this wouldn't have been possible. Should the reversal of the message come top down like that through the Prime Minister's personal authority? Pranab, you want to take this first?
Sure. Look, I don't want to second guess on this because I have frankly no information. But yes, the Prime Minister's messaging on economy, because of the political, the kind of trust and credibility he enjoys with the entire country, will play a big role. So if he signals nothing like it, if he signals nothing like it, he is a master at public communication, right? So he can communicate and articulate it in various different ways. But the signaling that, you need to come out there and start working, don't be afraid. And if there is something, we are there to take care of you, but let's get back to work. That signaling, in whichever way of articulation he may choose, if it comes from him, it will perhaps have the best impact politically. Obviously, it has to be complemented by a whole set of actions because economy is a complicated affair.
Vinay?
Yeah, I mean, Pranab knows it better, so I'll just leave it to that.
No, but I'm asking.
Yes, I think it has to. It has to.
Indian, that should it be?
It has to. It has to.
Is that a necessary condition? Is there a necessary condition for the message to reverse? Given that, just as pandemic is unprecedented, Prime Minister of Narendra Modi's authority, personal credibility, as Pranab said, is also we have not seen for decades now.
Yeah, I think, and the important part of signaling, as Pranab pointed out, is that look, go out, and if something happens, we have the institution, infrastructure, and system in place to take care. So the fear, he needs to take out the fear. Just as he instilled the fear to get people to comply with it, he needs to now take away the fear. Okay, look, the fear is now, the bigger fear is economy. We don't want the economy to collapse. We want your livelihood also to save your livelihood. So that messaging, when it comes from him, it's reinforced, it's much stronger. That confidence is that, okay, look, we are standing behind, but the priorities have shifted.
Good. We have to take one set of questions. Again, apologies to a lot of people for bunching up all your questions into one. I would like panelists to answer this in different ways. Vinay, you go first. MSMEs, what are the 2 or 3 things that have to be done quickly?
See, MSMEs are not an isolated thing that we can think. MSMEs are part of a big corporate supply chain, So it's always, we kind of assume that MSMEs are small, and they have a different ecosystem. No, they can only thrive when the bigger companies also thrive. So for that, it has to be entire tide, entire sea has to be lifted. But within that, MSMEs typically face the problems of liquidity because their suppliers don't pay, they have to pay. So we have to ensure that MSMEs have liquidity. Because of this crisis, they don't go into insolvency. Government gives out its dues. Corporates are also provided liquidity, so they disperse their dues in terms to MSMEs. We have to ensure that they survive.
Should there be a special window, Vinay, let's say? Should there be a special window for MSME lending, almost like a grant, not even a loan, for let's say 6 months?
Yes, I mean that would have to be there at some stage. So the way to look at this is to avoid businesses folding up by the time economies comes back on its foot. So we have to ensure that no MSME folds up till the time we start the economy running. Once the economy running and production starts and things start moving, obviously there is no problem. So it's an issue of liquidity and solvency. Do they have a liquidity to survive this period, and will they remain solvent after that? And those are the then few steps that you make sure that they are not declared NPAs. Banks continue to provide liquidity. Big corporates who have liquidity in turn then support their suppliers that they discount their bills. So it has to be, basically, we cannot treat them as isolated out of supply chain. They are part of the supply chain. And we have to just ensure that they don't fold. That is the idea.
Right.
Once economy picks up, anyway, you will.
to change the focus of the same question, MSMEs are also a huge political economic constituency. That are obvious, right? And this government has paid a lot of attention to it even earlier before the pandemic hit. What do you reckon that will there be, as we were discussing, a special kind of scheme for MSMEs for the side of everything?
Yeah, yes, I would imagine that's a big topic of discussion within the government. But let me sort of get the context here. The context, and that is a bit encouraging, is to look at all of this, the post-COVID or this COVID situation emerging out of the COVID crisis, as also an opportunity. So if you are able to work on your MSMEs, and also then what can you do to actually make them part of a newer supply chain? Can you actually, given the global situation is going to actually be more conducive towards India or more receptive towards India? So there are huge opportunities, and how do you prepare them for bigger supplier chains? I think those are all ambitions which are being talked about. So whatever intervention, as I hear it, will dovetail with this ambition, hopefully so. So in that sense, I think it's not just going to be about giving them something for the short term, but also restructuring and reforming in the medium and longer term.
But the two won't be linked, right? But the Vinay's point was that we should try to make sure that hundreds or thousands of MSMEs don't go under before the economy recovers. So
absolutely,
right.
That's not, as I told you right in the answer to one of your earlier questions. Imagine the government. I mean, the way it's working is the two baskets. One is the immediate measures, and that has to be done, and the other is the reforms that you can dovetail with that, right? So yes, so both are linked, but yes, the first has to come.
Right. I think we have maybe 2.5 minutes left. There are still questions coming. We will have to put an end to the discussion, I'm afraid, but I would invite both panelists to round up what we have discussed and maybe speak for a minute each. I'm sorry to sound like a television actor, but we are really running short of time. Vinay?
So, Saubhik, I think at this point, we just need to bring economy back to the center. We need to flip the thing that management of COVID, we have the institution, we have the resources, we have the infrastructure in place to manage. Numbers are going to rise. There's no doubt we can't be have ostrich approach and wish that numbers will not rise. Numbers will rise. We have the systems in place to deal with them. And now the emphasis needs to quickly shift to the economy, and that needs to be spelled out clearly that priority is economy while we manage COVID. That message needs to go down to states and districts, and to the extent some states do it, there'll be pressure on others to do it. There'll be competitive pressure for them to open up, and we must quickly announce the stimulus. There is no waiting. I mean, we just can't keep waiting for this thing and fine tuning it and timing it. A message needs to come out. We are willing to spend 15 lakh crores.
Correct. Excellent way to end, Vinay. Pranab?
I will look. To me, the whole economy question is actually a political question at this point in time. Right. And what people need to understand is the definition of victory. Our politicians have been, the lockdown has been very successful. We've been able to beat COVID. Well, that's all fine, but we've moved on. And the thing is, the definition of victory is going to be how are you going to revive your economy from here onwards. If you're able to do that, then you have really won the battle. I think that's one definition of victory, political victory, which has to be clear. And second, which has dawned upon politicians, or rather dawning upon as we speak, is exiting the lockdown is not just an administrative decision. It involves amount of political risk, and that risk-taking propensity should be shown by our politicians' leadership at every level, because otherwise we'll just be running around circles in this situation of lifting red zone, green zone. It's not going to work. Right. Exiting is a politically risky decision, and that risk has to be taken. And now that you're prepared, that political risk, let's see what kind of propensity to take that risk our politicians show in the coming weeks.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Vinay. Thank you, Pranab. I personally learned a lot speaking to my two colleagues. I just hope all our viewers who are so kind to listen to us for nearly an hour also learned something. We will be back. It is Back to Business webinar will continue. We'll be back next week. Sometime in the next few days, we will announce what our topic is. Thank you very much again, all of you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.